The laughter echoed across the training hall like a wave of cruel music. David Reed tightened his grip on the leather-wrapped handle of his katana and tried to ignore the sound. Around him, 60 other cadets from a dozen different alien species clutched weapons that hummed with power or glowed with contained energy. His sword just sat in his hand, silent and simple, the dark steel reflecting nothing but his own disappointed face. Master Orenthal moved through the arena on his 4 powerful legs. His upper arms crossed while his lower hands gestured at the cadets. The Dracnian warrior stood 3 meters tall, his scaled hide covered in scars from 100 battles. He stopped in front of David and looked down with something between pity and disgust. "This is what you bring to my final examination?" The instructor's voice boomed. "A piece of sharpened metal? We are training warriors for galactic warfare, Cadet Reed, not cooks for a kitchen." More laughter rippled through the group. David felt his face grow hot but kept his eyes forward. The sword had belonged to his grandfather, passed down through 3 generations of Reed soldiers. The old man had carried it through conflicts that most history books barely mentioned anymore. It was all David had left of him. "The unbreakable awaits you all in 3 weeks, Master Orenthal continued, moving away from David to address the entire class. For those who have forgotten, it is a shield made of Titan X composite, the strongest defensive material known to our civilization. Your task is simple: damage it. Leave a mark upon its surface. Those who succeed will graduate with honors. Those who fail will return next year to try again." A massive cadet named Borinth raised one of his 3 arms. The Crucian warrior was twice David's size, covered in natural armor plating that made him look like a walking tank. "Master, has anyone ever damaged the unbreakable?" "No," Orenthal said flatly. "That is why we call it what we call it. But each year cadets come closer. Last year, a student using a molecular disruption beam created a scratch 1 millimeter deep. Perhaps this year one of you will do better." The instructor turned back to David. "But not with that." He pointed at the katana with one clawed finger. "Primitive human steel will not even scratch the surface. You might as well bring a wooden stick." David spoke before he could stop himself. "My grandfather used this sword to—" "Your grandfather," Orenthal interrupted, "lived in a different time. When humans fought other humans with metal and gunpowder, we fight across star systems now, Cadet Reed. We face enemies that can destroy planets. What use is a sword that cannot even cut modern armor?" David had no answer. He looked down at the weapon in his hands. The blade was just over 70 centimeters long, curved slightly with a simple round guard. His grandfather had told him stories about how it was forged, how the steel had been folded 1,000 times to create strength and flexibility. But those stories felt hollow now, surrounded by weapons that could burn holes through solid metal or vibrate fast enough to slice through bone without effort. After the training session ended, David sat alone in the empty arena. Most of the other cadets had left quickly, eager to modify their weapons or test new power settings. He ran his thumb carefully along the edge of the blade. It was sharp. His grandfather had taught him how to maintain it properly, but sharp did not mean strong enough for what waited ahead. "You look like someone told you your ship has no fuel." A soft voice spoke from behind him. David turned to see Lyra approaching. She was Qualian, small and thin with large eyes that could see in spectrums humans could not. She worked in the engineering section, but attended combat training to understand what the equipment she built would face in real battles. Unlike most of the other cadets, she had never laughed at his sword. "Master Orenthal thinks I should give up," David said. "Master Orenthal thinks anything that does not have a power source is useless," Lyra replied, sitting down beside him. "He once told me that manual tools were for species too stupid to invent batteries." Despite everything, David smiled a little. Lyra looked at the katana with genuine curiosity. "Why do you keep using it? You could request any weapon from the Academy Armory." David thought about that question. He had asked himself the same thing many times over the past 3 years of training. "Because my grandfather believed in it. Because he said that strength is not just about the weapon, it is about understanding what needs to be cut." "That sounds wise," Lyra said. "But how does it help you break the unbreakable?" David stood up and sheathed the sword. "I do not know yet, but I have 3 weeks to figure it out." As he walked toward the exit, he looked back at the training arena one last time. Somewhere in the Academy storage vault, the Titan X shield waited. Unbreakable. Impossible. A challenge that no one had ever overcome. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. When everyone tells you something cannot be done, that just means no one has understood the problem correctly yet. David left the arena with one thought in his mind. He would not abandon his sword. He would prove them all wrong. David pressed his finger against the screen and scrolled through another document about Titan X Composite. His eyes hurt from reading for 6 straight hours, but he kept going. The Academy library was nearly empty at this hour. Most cadets were in the training halls, pushing their weapons to higher power levels or practicing their strikes against reinforced targets. David had chosen a different path. Everything he read told him the same thing. Titan X was perfect. The material had been developed by the Korvathi Science Guild 2 centuries ago. Its molecular structure could absorb and redistribute kinetic impacts across its entire surface. Energy weapons were even less effective because the composite could convert thermal energy into harmless light that simply dissipated into the air. Every attempt to damage it only made it stronger by forcing the molecules to bind more tightly together. No wonder they called it the Unbreakable. David leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. 3 weeks had seemed like enough time when Master Orenthal first announced the test. Now, with only 2 weeks remaining, it felt like nothing. He had spent every free moment researching, reading, studying the science behind the shield. But all the knowledge in the galaxy would not help him if there was simply no way to damage the material. "You look terrible." A voice broke through his thoughts. David looked up to see Dr. Petra Walsh standing beside his desk. She was one of only 5 human professors at the Academy. A woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She taught astrophysics to the advanced classes. "I am fine," David said automatically. Petra pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. She glanced at his screen and raised an eyebrow. "Titanic's research, you are taking the final examination seriously." "Everyone is," David said. "I just have more to prove than most." Petra nodded slowly. "I heard about what Master Orenthal said. About your sword." She paused. "I knew your grandfather, you know. Thomas Reed. We served together on the frontier colonies before I came here to teach." David sat up straighter. His grandfather had died when David was 12, and he had never met anyone else who had served with the old man. "You knew him?" "He saved my life," Petra said simply. "Twice, actually. Once during a pirate raid on the supply depot where I was stationed. The second time during the evacuation of Proxima 7 when the reactors failed." She smiled at some distant memory. "He carried that same sword you have now. Everyone thought he was crazy for bringing a blade to fights where the enemy had plasma rifles and explosive rounds." "What did he tell them?" David asked. "Nothing. He just proved them wrong over and over until they stopped questioning." Petra leaned forward. "Your grandfather understood something that most warriors never learn. He knew that every tool has a purpose and every target has a weakness. The trick is matching them correctly." David gestured at his screen full of research. "I have been trying to find a weakness in Titan X for weeks. There is nothing. It is literally designed to have no weak points." Petra was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across and changed the search parameters on his screen. "You are looking at this wrong. You are searching for structural weaknesses. But Titan X does not have structural weaknesses. It has theoretical ones." "What is the difference?" David asked. "Structure is about what something is made of. Theory is about how it behaves." Petra pulled up a new document, one with classification markers that David did not have access to. "I probably should not show you this, but your grandfather would have wanted me to help. This is a research paper from the Korvathi Science Guild. It was written 50 years ago by the team that invented Titan X. They included something interesting in their conclusion." David read the section she highlighted. The technical language was dense, but he understood the basic concept. Titan X could absorb and redistribute any force applied to it. But the redistribution was not instant. It happened at a specific frequency, a kind of molecular vibration that spread the impact across the material. The paper theorized that if someone could match that exact frequency with their strike, they might be able to disrupt the redistribution process. "But this is theoretical," David said. "The paper says no weapon could possibly strike at the precise frequency needed. The timing would need to be perfect down to a fraction of a microsecond." "No energy weapon could do it," Petra agreed. "The power surge would be impossible to control that precisely." "But a physical weapon?" She looked at David's sword, which lay on the table beside his research materials. "A blade that the wielder has practiced with for thousands of hours might be able to achieve that kind of consistency." David picked up the katana and examined it with new eyes. My grandfather practiced with this every day. He taught me the same forms he learned. The same strikes, the same movements repeated until they became automatic. Muscle memory, Petra said. Your body knows how to move that sword without you having to think about it. That kind of unconscious precision is something no machine can replicate. She stood up to leave. I cannot tell you what to do, David, but I can tell you what your grandfather believed. He believed that understanding your enemy is more important than overpowering them. After Petra left, David sat in the silent library and thought about what she had said. He pulled up additional research about harmonic frequencies and resonance. The more he read, the more the idea made sense. He did not need to break through Titanex with brute force. He needed to disrupt it from within by matching its natural vibration frequency. But how could he find the exact frequency? And even if he found it, how could he guarantee that his strike would match it perfectly? David left the library and went straight to the engineering section. He found Lyra working late on a propulsion system that had malfunctioned during training exercises. She looked up when he entered, her large eyes blinking in surprise. I need your help, David said. 20 minutes later, Lyra had pulled up schematics of Titanex on her workstation. David explained what he had learned from Petra's research paper. Lyra listened carefully, her head tilting to one side as she processed the information. You want to create a harmonic disruption, she said finally. That is brilliant. Also completely insane. Can you measure the frequency? David asked. If I practice my strike, can you tell me when it matches the frequency of Titanex? Lyra thought for a moment, then began typing rapidly. I can build a portable harmonic analyzer. It will measure the vibration frequency of your blade when you swing it. If you can hit the same frequency consistently, we will know you have a chance. How long will it take? David asked. 2 days, Lyra said. Maybe 3. But David, even if this works in theory, you will need to practice constantly. The margin for error is 0. One mistake and you will just bounce off the shield like everyone else. David looked at his sword. Then I better start practicing now. For the next week, David lived in the training arena. He swung his sword 10,000 times a day, focusing on a single strike. Lyra's harmonic analyzer beeped softly each time he swung, showing him whether he was close to the target frequency. At first, his swings were inconsistent, varying by large margins. But slowly, hour by hour, day by day, the variations grew smaller. His hands developed new calluses. His shoulders ached constantly. But the analyzer showed improvement. He was learning to hear the frequency in his mind, to feel when the strike was correct before the analyzer confirmed it. 1 week remained until the final examination. Blood dripped from David's hands onto the training mat. He had wrapped his palms in bandages that morning, but the fabric had worn through hours ago. The skin underneath was raw and torn from gripping the sword handle through thousands of repetitions. He raised the katana again and focused on the target dummy in front of him. Breathe in, breathe out, strike. The blade sang through the air with a soft whistle. Lyra's harmonic analyzer, mounted on a stand beside the dummy, let out a single clear tone. The frequency matched. David allowed himself a small smile before raising the sword again. One perfect strike meant nothing. He needed to be able to do it every time without thinking, without hesitation, without fear. You are wasting your time. Master Orenthal's voice cut through the quiet training hall. David lowered his sword and turned. The instructor stood at the entrance with his forearms crossed, his expression showing disapproval mixed with something that might have been concern. I am practicing, David said simply. You are injuring yourself for nothing, Orenthal said, moving closer. His eyes noted the blood on David's hands, the exhaustion in his posture. I have been teaching at this academy for 30 years, Cadet Reed. I have seen countless students attempt the impossible. They all fail. Your determination is admirable, but determination does not change the laws of physics. David set the sword down carefully and faced his instructor. What if there was a way? A method that did not rely on raw power? Orenthal's expression hardened. There is no method. Titanex cannot be broken. That is the point of the test. We want to see how you approach an impossible challenge, whether you show creativity in your attempt, whether you maintain discipline even in failure. He gestured at David's bloody hands. This is not discipline. This is obsession. My grandfather always said that the difference between obsession and dedication is whether you succeed, David replied quietly. Your grandfather fought in a different era, Orenthal said. He never faced Titan X. If he had, even he would have understood the futility. The instructor paused, and his voice softened slightly. I am trying to help you, David. Drop this foolish focus on your primitive weapon. The Academy Armory has plasma cutters, molecular saws, kinetic hammers. Use something with actual power. At least then you might leave a scratch and earn partial credit. David picked up his sword again. No. Orenthal's eyes narrowed. No? With respect, Master, I will use this sword. It is my choice to make. The instructor stared at David for a long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. Before leaving, he looked back. When you fail, you will not graduate with your class. You will return next year and start over. Is your pride worth an entire year of your life? After Orenthal left, David stood alone in the training hall. His hands throbbed with pain. His arms felt like they were made of lead. Doubt crept into his mind like cold water. What if the instructor was right? What if he was throwing away his future for a foolish belief in an old piece of metal? He thought about his grandfather. Thomas Reed had been a practical man, not given to sentiment or empty tradition. If he had carried the sword through so many battles, there had to be a reason. Not nostalgia. Not stubbornness, understanding. David raised the blade and struck the dummy again. The analyzer chimed. Perfect frequency. He struck again. Another chime. And again. And again. 2 days before the examination, Master Orenthal called David to his office. When David arrived, he found not just his instructor, but 3 other Academy officials waiting. Professor Petra Walsh was there too, standing to the side with her arms crossed and her expression neutral. Cadet Reed. Orenthal began formally. It has come to our attention that you have been conducting unusual research in the Academy database. Research into the theoretical weaknesses of Titan X composite. David felt his stomach tighten. I was studying the material I will be tested against. That is not against regulations. It depends on your intentions, said one of the other officials, a stern-looking woman from the disciplinary board. If you are planning to exploit some kind of technical loophole or use information to cheat the examination, that would be grounds for immediate expulsion. I am not cheating, David said firmly. I am trying to understand. Understanding is not cheating. Explain your method, Orenthal demanded. Explain exactly how you plan to damage Titan X with that sword. David glanced at Petra, who gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. He took a deep breath and explained the theory of harmonic disruption. He described how Titan X redistributes force at a specific frequency, and how a strike matching that frequency might disrupt the redistribution. He showed them Lyra's harmonic analyzer data, demonstrating how he had trained himself to hit the target frequency consistently. The officials listened in silence. When David finished, they exchanged looks. This is theoretical nonsense, Orenthal said flatly. No physical strike could be that precise. With respect, Master, you have never tried, David replied. You dismiss it as impossible without testing it. Because I understand the science involved, Orenthal shot back. The timing required would need to be accurate to microseconds. Human reflexes are not capable of that level of precision. Conscious reflexes are not, Petra spoke up. But unconscious muscle memory developed over thousands of hours of practice? That might be different. She looked at the disciplinary officer. What David is proposing is not cheating. He is not tampering with the shield or using forbidden technology. He is simply using technique and training to attempt a method that no one else has considered. The officials conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, the disciplinary officer spoke. We will allow you to proceed, Cadet Reed. However, if you fail, you will be marked accordingly. And if we discover any evidence of tampering or rule violations, you will be expelled immediately. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, David said. As the meeting ended and David left the office, Orenthal called after him. Reed, one more thing. David stopped and turned back. The instructor's expression was hard to read. I hope you know what you are doing. For your sake and for Earth's reputation. That night, David lay in his quarters unable to sleep. Tomorrow was the day before the examination. His last chance to practice. His hands had healed slightly, wrapped in medical gel that accelerated tissue repair, but they still hurt every time he gripped the sword. He got up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the training arena where tomorrow's test would take place. Somewhere in the storage vault beneath it, the Titan X shield waited. Unbreakable. Impossible. His communication device beeped. A message from Lyra appeared on the screen. I checked the analyzer readings from today. You hit the target frequency 97 times out of 100. You can do this, David smiled and typed back.
Thank you.
For everything. Do not thank me yet, Lyra replied. Thank me after you cut the impossible tomorrow. David set down the device and picked up his grandfather's sword. He held it in both hands and thought about all the battles it had seen, all the challenges it had overcome. His grandfather had trusted this blade with his life. Tomorrow, David would trust it with his future. He spent the next 12 hours in the training hall. No analyzer this time, no measurements. Just David and the sword, moving through the forms his grandfather had taught him. Strike after strike after strike until his body knew the movement better than breathing. When the morning finally came, David was ready. Thousands of eyes watched from the observation platform surrounding the examination arena. David had not expected this many spectators. Students from other training cycles, faculty members from every department, even dignitaries from various planetary governments had come to watch the final examination. The event had grown beyond a simple graduation test into something approaching a spectacle. At the center of the arena floor stood the Titan X shield. It rose 3 meters high and 2 meters wide, a perfect rectangle of dark gray material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. David could see it from where he waited with the other cadets in the preparation area. The shield looked ordinary, almost boring. Nothing about it suggested the impossible strength contained within its molecular structure. Attention all cadets, Master Orenthal's voice boomed across the arena. Today you face the ultimate test of your training. Before you stands the unbreakable, a shield that has withstood every attempt to damage it for 20 years. Your task is simple but not easy. You will each have one attempt to leave your mark upon its surface. The depth and size of any damage will determine your final score. Those who cause no damage will fail this examination. David watched as the first cadet stepped forward. She was a Valtorian, her crystalline body structure making her naturally resistant to most forms of damage. She carried a plasma lance that glowed with barely contained energy. The weapon's power indicator showed it was charged to maximum capacity. The cadet approached the shield, took a stance, and thrust the lance forward with all her strength. The plasma tip connected with the Titan X surface in a burst of brilliant light. Energy cascaded across the shield in wave patterns, creating a beautiful but brief display. When the light faded and the cadet stepped back, the shield surface was unchanged. Not a mark, not even a discoloration, the crowd murmured. The Valtorian cadet walked away with her head down, her failure complete in public. One by one, the other cadets took their turns. David watched each attempt carefully. A Drachnian warrior used a kinetic hammer that should have been able to dent solid steel. The impact echoed across the arena like thunder, but the shield remained perfect. A Quilian engineer tried a molecular disassembly beam that made the air shimmer and warp around its target. Nothing. A human cadet named Robert used an explosive charge calculated to deliver maximum concussive force. The blast was loud enough to make ears ring, but when the smoke cleared, the shield stood unmarked. Failure after failure. Some cadets grew angry, striking multiple times until the proctors had to pull them away. Others walked up with resignation already clear on their faces, going through the motions because they had no choice. Then Borenth stepped forward. The massive Crucian warrior was the top-ranked student in the entire academy. He carried a weapons platform that floated beside him, a complex piece of technology that combined multiple attack systems into one devastating tool. The crowd grew quiet as Borenth activated the platform. It hummed with power that made the air vibrate. Full power, Borenth announced to the proctors. Authorization code Omega-77. The platform's weapons charged simultaneously. Energy built up until David could feel it in his teeth. Then Borenth triggered the attack. A beam of concentrated force hit the Titan X shield with an impact that shook the entire arena. The light was so bright that David had to look away. The sound was like 1,000 pieces of metal being torn apart at once. When it finally stopped and David could see again, the shield stood with a visible dent in its surface. Small, perhaps only 2 centimeters deep and 5 centimeters wide, but undeniably real. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Master Orenthal himself looked impressed. Borenth of Crucis, you have achieved what no cadet has accomplished in 5 years. A true mark upon the unbreakable. Your score will be the highest in Academy history. Borenth raised his arms in victory. The other cadets, who had already failed, applauded. happy to at least see someone succeed. David felt his heart sink. That dent represented the absolute peak of what modern weapons technology could achieve. And it was still just a dent, a tiny imperfection in an otherwise perfect surface. How could a simple sword possibly do better? 30 more cadets took their turns after Borinth. None came close to matching his achievement. Most left no mark at all. A few created scratches so small they were barely visible. The examination was turning into a demonstration of Borinth's superiority over everyone else. Finally, only David remained. Cadet David Reed. Master Orenthal's voice had a strange quality to it now. Not quite mocking, but not encouraging either. Something between pity and resignation. Please step forward for your examination. David walked out onto the arena floor. The distance from the preparation area to the shield felt like kilometers. Every eye in the arena was on him. He could hear whispers from the crowd. Is that really just a sword? He must be joking. Poor kid. Probably could not afford a real weapon. David reached the shield and stood before it. Up close, the Titan X looked even more intimidating. The surface was smooth as glass, but somehow darker than any darkness he had ever seen. Borinth's dent was visible off to one side, a small victory in an otherwise perfect defense. He drew his katana. The simple sound of steel sliding against the wooden sheath seemed pathetically quiet, after all the energy weapons and explosive devices the other cadets had used. A few people in the crowd actually laughed. Master Orenthal stepped forward to make the formal announcement. Cadet Reed has chosen to attempt this examination with a primitive human blade made of folded steel. This weapon predates spaceflight technology by several centuries. The instructor paused and his voice took on an edge. This will demonstrate that human stubbornness extends beyond weapon choice to basic judgment itself. More laughter from the crowd. David heard it but did not react. He was focused entirely on the shield in front of him. He could almost hear its molecular structure humming at that specific frequency Petra had shown him in the research papers. The sound only existed in his mind, but he had trained himself to hear it anyway. Somewhere in the observation platforms he knew Lyra was watching. Petra, too. And somewhere beyond this space station, beyond all the stars visible through the arena's transparent dome, his grandfather's memory watched as well. David took his stance. Both hands on the sword grip, the blade held at shoulder height, his weight balanced perfectly between his feet. This was the same stance his grandfather had taught him when he was 8 years old. The same stance he had practiced 10,000 times in the past 2 weeks. He closed his eyes and listened to the frequency that was not a sound. His muscles remembered the motion without his brain needing to command them. His breathing slowed until he could feel his heartbeat in his chest, steady and strong. The arena was completely silent now. Even the mockers had stopped laughing, curious to see what would happen. David breathed in one final time, held it, then released it along with every doubt, every fear, every concern about failure or success. He struck. The sword moved faster than thought. David's body executed the technique with precision born from endless repetition. The blade cut through the air with a sound like wind through leaves. Time seemed to slow as the sharp edge approached the Titan X surface. Then contact. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The blade touched the shield and David felt resistance. The same resistance that had stopped every other weapon throughout the day. But then something changed. The resistance vanished. The katana passed through the Titan X shield like the material was not even there. David felt no resistance at all, just the smooth continuation of his strike until the blade completed its arc, and he stood in the finishing position, sword held low at his side. For 5 complete seconds, absolute silence filled the arena. David opened his eyes. The shield stood in front of him, apparently unchanged. Had he failed? Had the technique not worked after all? He started to straighten up, disappointment already forming in his chest. Then the shield split in half. The 2 pieces did not crack or shatter. They simply separated along a perfectly straight line where David's blade had passed through. The halves fell away from each other with a strange grace, toppling to the arena floor with 2 heavy thuds that echoed across the stunned silence. David stared. The cut was perfect. The edge was so clean it looked like the 2 pieces had never been connected at all. Not a rough edge, not a splinter of material, just a flawless separation. Someone in the crowd gasped. Then someone else. Then suddenly the entire arena erupted in chaos. Scientists rushed from the observation platforms, their instruments already scanning for data. Proctors surrounded the fallen shield pieces, examining them with disbelief clear on their faces. Students shouted questions to each other, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Some of the alien cadets thought it must be a trick, a malfunction of the shield itself rather than something David had actually accomplished. Master Orenthal stood frozen. His forearms hung at his sides. His expression was beyond shock, beyond disbelief. He looked like someone had just proven that gravity no longer existed. David remained in his stance, sword still held in the finishing position. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his chest. His hands were shaking. Had that really just happened? Had he actually cut the unbreakable? Lyra appeared at his side, having somehow made it through the crowd of scientists and officials. Her large eyes were filled with tears. "You did it," she said, her voice breaking. "David, you actually did it." Before David could respond, a group of Academy officials reached him. Professor Petra Walsh was among them, along with the stern disciplinary officer who had questioned him 2 days ago. "Cadet Reed," the disciplinary officer said sharply, "you will come with us immediately. Do not leave the arena. Do not speak to anyone else." David's stomach dropped. They thought he had cheated. They thought he had somehow rigged the shield to break. "I did not. Just come with us," Petra said quietly, her eyes warning him to stay silent. They escorted David to a sealed room beneath the arena floor. The walls were transparent on one side, showing the fallen shield pieces being examined by a team of scientists. David could see them measuring, scanning, arguing among themselves about what could possibly have caused this. Master Orenthal entered the room with 3 other senior instructors. His expression had moved from shock to something darker. Suspicion. "Explain," he demanded. "Explain how a simple steel blade cut through material that withstood plasma weapons and molecular disruptors." David told them everything. He explained Petra's research paper about harmonic frequencies. He described how Titan X redistributes force and how matching that frequency could disrupt the redistribution. He showed them data from Lyra's harmonic analyzer, proving he had trained himself to strike at exactly the right frequency thousands of times. The instructors listened, their faces showing varying degrees of skepticism. When David finished, Orenthal shook his head. "Impossible. Human reflexes cannot be that precise. You must have tampered with the shield somehow." "Then test it," David said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Bring another Titan X panel. Let me try again under supervised conditions." The disciplinary officer considered this. That would require Academy resources and approval from the dean. "Then get approval," Petra said firmly. "If David cheated, prove it. But if he did not, this represents a breakthrough in combat theory that could change everything." 2 hours later, David stood in a secured testing chamber deep inside the Academy. A fresh panel of Titan X had been installed, this one even larger than the examination shield. Master Orenthal, Petra, the disciplinary officer, and a dozen other officials watched from behind protective barriers. But there was one difference this time. "Before Cadet Reed attempts his technique," Orenthal said, his voice carrying across the chamber through speakers, "I will attempt the same strike with the same weapon." David's eyes widened. "Master, I do not think—" "If this is truly about technique and not tampering," Orenthal interrupted, "then I should be able to replicate it. I have forearms and strength far superior to any human. I have trained in combat for 40 years. If you can cut Titan X, then surely I can as well." David wanted to argue that it did not work that way, that strength and experience were not the same as the specific muscle memory he had developed. But he knew they would not believe him. They needed to see it themselves. He handed his sword to Master Orenthal. The instructor took the katana in 2 of his hands and examined it. "Light, primitive, but well-balanced, I admit." He approached the Titan X panel and took a stance similar to the one David had used. Orenthal struck. The blade bounced off the Titan X surface with a harsh ringing sound. The instructor's expression tightened. He tried again, putting more power behind the swing. Again the sword bounced away, the shield unmarked. "The angle must be precise," Orenthal muttered. He adjusted his stance and tried a 3rd time. Bounce. 4th time. Bounce. 5th time. Bounce. Frustration grew on the instructor's face. He tried 17 different angles. 17 different levels of force, 17 different speeds. Every single attempt ended the same way. The sword rebounded from the Titanic's surface without leaving even a scratch. Finally, breathing hard from the exertion, Orenthal lowered the sword. He looked at David with an expression that mixed anger with something that might have been respect. How? David stepped forward and took his sword back. The handle felt right in his hands, familiar as his own skin. May I? The officials nodded. David approached the fresh Titanex panel. He did not think about technique or frequency or any of the science he had learned. He simply let his body remember what it had practiced 10,000 times. The stance came automatically. The breathing rhythm was natural. The strike was not a conscious decision but an unconscious motion. The blade passed through the Titanex like air. The panel split cleanly in two and fell away, revealing the wall behind it. The chamber erupted in noise. Officials shouted questions at each other. Scientists rushed to examine the cut. Master Orenthal stood motionless, staring at the fallen panel pieces as if they had personally betrayed him. How? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper now. David lowered his sword and looked at his instructor. Because you taught me that strength determines victory, but my grandfather taught me something different. He taught me that understanding determines when strength is necessary. He gestured at the sword. The weapon is not weak, Master Orenthal. Your perspective was. Silence fell across the chamber. Master Orenthal looked at David for a long moment. Then slowly the instructor bowed his head. It was a gesture of respect that David had never seen the proud Dracnian warrior offer to anyone, let alone a human cadet. I was wrong, Orenthal said quietly. About you. About your weapon. About what makes a true warrior. He raised his head and his eyes met David's. Forgive me, Cadet Reed. You have taught me a lesson that 40 years of combat never did. 3 months had passed since David cut the unbreakable. He stood now in what had become his regular teaching space, a modified training hall where cadets from all disciplines came to learn what the Academy was calling adaptive combat. Philosophy, the name felt overly formal to David. He simply thought of it as understanding your tools and your enemy. 15 cadets sat in front of him today, representing 8 different species. They each had their own weapons, energy blades, kinetic projectors, plasma rifles. But they had all come to learn the principle David had demonstrated with his grandfather's sword. Power is easy to understand, David said, pacing in front of the group. You pull a trigger, energy releases, target is destroyed. Simple cause and effect. But what happens when you face a target that cannot be destroyed by power alone? A young Dracnian cadet raised one of his 4 hands. You use more power? That is what most warriors think, David replied. And sometimes it works. But sometimes you just waste energy and accomplish nothing. The Titanex shield proved that. Borenth used the most powerful weapon available and created a dent 2 centimeters deep. Impressive, yes, but not enough to actually breach the defense. But you cut it completely, another cadet said. How is that not power? David picked up his katana from where it rested against the wall. The blade was the same as always, simple steel without any technological enhancement. This sword cannot generate enough force to dent Titanex. That is a fact. So instead of trying to overpower the material, I learned to understand it. I studied how Titanex works at a molecular level. I found the rhythm of its defensive system. Then I matched that rhythm. He demonstrated the strike in slow motion, letting the cadets see every detail of the motion. This is not about strength. It is about precision. About knowing your weapon so well that your body can execute movements without conscious thought. About understanding your target deeply enough to find a solution that others miss. Over the past months, David had watched as this concept spread through the entire academy. Combat instructors who had taught the same methods for decades were now incorporating David's principles into their training. Even Master Orenthal had changed his approach, spending more time teaching cadets to analyze their targets rather than simply hit them harder. The Dracnian instructor had become David's strongest supporter, though the relationship remained formal. Orenthal now taught a joint class with David on enemy analysis, using his 40 years of combat experience combined with David's newer perspective on problem solving. After the training session ended and the cadets filed out, Lyra entered the hall carrying a datapad. She had been promoted to senior engineering analyst, partly because her harmonic analyzer design had proven useful for applications far beyond helping David train. "You have another message from the Galactic Defense Council," Lyra said, handing him the pad. "They want you to visit their headquarters next month to demonstrate the technique to their tactical division." David sighed. He had received dozens of similar requests. Everyone wanted to see the human who cut the impossible, who proved that ancient weapons could still be relevant in an age of advanced technology. It was flattering but exhausting. "Tell them I will consider it," David said, "after graduation season is finished." "Speaking of graduation," Lyra said with a small smile, "the Academy Board approved the memorial." David looked up sharply. "They did?" Lyra nodded. "Construction starts next week. It will be placed in the main courtyard where every cadet will see it on their first day." 3 weeks later, David stood in front of the completed memorial with Petra Walsh beside him. The statue was 3 meters tall, made of the same dark metal as the training weapons. It showed a human figure in mid-strike, holding a katana in the exact position David had used to cut the Titan X shield. The figure's face was deliberately generic, representing not just David, but all warriors who chose understanding over brute force. At the base of the statue, words were carved in common galactic standard: "Strength breaks. Understanding endures." "Your grandfather would be proud," Petra said quietly. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He had learned so much since that day in the arena. About combat, about teaching, about himself. But the most important lesson had come from a simple piece of advice his grandfather had given him years ago. Understand what needs to be cut, not just physically, not just the enemy in front of you, but the assumptions that limit your thinking, the prejudices that blind you to solutions, the belief that because something has always been done one way, it must always be done that way. The Academy had called Titan X the Unbreakable for 20 years. Everyone accepted it. Everyone stopped trying to find new approaches. They just tried the same basic methods with more power, more technology, more force, until someone came along who understood that the problem was not the shield itself, but how people thought about the shield. David's communication device beeped. A message from Master Orenthal appeared. "Combat training begins in 1 hour. I trust you will not be late, Instructor Reed." David smiled. He had graduated top of his class as expected after cutting the Unbreakable. The Academy had immediately offered him a position as an instructor, the youngest in their history. He had accepted on the condition that he could continue teaching his own methods, not just the traditional curriculum. Orenthal had supported the decision, even insisting that David should have rank equal to the senior combat instructors despite his age and limited experience. The cadet who proves his instructor wrong deserves the authority to teach others, Orenthal had said during the ceremony where David received his appointment. "I was blind to the truth." He opened my eyes. "That is the mark of a true master." As David walked across the academy grounds toward the training complex, other instructors and students stopped to acknowledge him, some with respect, some with curiosity, a few with lingering skepticism. Not everyone had accepted his methods. Some still believed that power was the only thing that mattered in combat. But slowly, minds were changing. David entered the training hall and found Master Orenthal already there, working with a young human cadet who had just enrolled. The boy looked nervous, out of place among the larger alien students. "This is Cadet Wilson," Orenthal said when David approached. "He comes from one of the colony worlds. Like you, he brings a family weapon. Unlike you, he is considering abandoning it before he even begins training." David looked at the weapon the cadet held. It was a staff made of what looked like reinforced bamboo. Simple, primitive, completely out of place in an academy where other students carried weapons that could level buildings. "Why do you want to abandon it?" David asked. The cadet looked embarrassed. "Because it is just a stick, sir. Everyone else has real weapons." David smiled and drew his katana. "This is just sharpened metal, but a cut-through material that no one else could damage. Do you know why?" The cadet shook his head. "Because I understood it," David said. "Not the target. The weapon. I knew exactly what my sword could do and could not do. I trained with it until it became part of me, until I could use it without thinking." He sheathed the blade. "Your staff is only a stick if you treat it like a stick. If you learn to understand it, really understand it, it can become something more." Hope flickered in the cadet's eyes. "You really think so?" "I know so," David replied. Because 3 months ago everyone thought my sword was useless too. Master Orenthal placed one of his large hands on the cadet's shoulder. Instructor Reed will work with you personally. Learn from him. He has much to teach. After the cadet left to prepare for his first real training session, Orenthal turned to David. 5 years ago, I would have told that boy to put away his primitive weapon and choose something with actual power. I was a fool. You were teaching what you knew, David said. What your experience had shown you was true. Experience can blind us, Orenthal said. It makes us stop questioning, stop learning. The Drachnian warrior looked at David with respect that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. You reminded me that a true warrior never stops being a student. David's device beeped again. This time the message was from an address he did not recognize. When he opened it, he found a short video recording. An older woman appeared on the screen. She was human, perhaps in her 70s, with kind eyes and a military bearing. Instructor Reed, she began. You do not know me, but I served with your grandfather for 15 years. My name is Commander Rachel Stone. I watched the recording of your examination. When I saw you cut the Titan X shield, I finally understood what Thomas tried to teach me all those years ago. She paused, and her eyes grew wet. He would be so proud of you. Not because you succeeded, but because you understood. Thank you for proving that his lessons still matter. The recording ended. David stood in the empty training hall and thought about his grandfather, about the sword he had carried through so many battles, about the lessons he had tried to pass down to his grandson. Understand what needs to be cut. David had spent weeks thinking that meant understanding Titan X, understanding the target. But now he realized the lesson was deeper than that. His grandfather had been trying to teach him to cut through assumptions, to cut through prejudice, to cut through the blind acceptance of that is how things have always been done. The sword was never weak. The thinking about the sword was weak. David picked up his katana and held it in both hands. The weight was familiar. The balance was perfect. This simple piece of folded steel had changed everything. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Tradition was not weakness. Old methods were not automatically inferior. Sometimes the ancient ways survived because they understood truths that modern thinking had forgotten. And sometimes, David thought as he sheathed the blade, the best way to face the future was to remember the past.